cell. So what is the, first of all, the heart has a conduction system, right? This is what, that's electricity through the heart, right? Okay. So the different electricities through the heart create the process of contraction, which is called what in the heart? Okay, which is, and when we take blood pressure, we measure what? Systolic and diastolic pressure, right? Systolic is the contraction, diastolic is relaxation. So those processes in the heart actually create electrical events in the heart, and that is what we see as the EKG. That's electricity to represent. So that EKG is what we call measured from a galvanometer, which is the same thing like a multimeter. Okay, so but it's, EKG is pretty sensitive to the signals in the heart. Okay. So first thing I'm going to do is talk about a cell, a myocardial cell. So we call it a myocardial cell, right? So let's go ahead and start with a myocardial cell, right? Okay. So one myocardial cell next to another myocardial cell. How do heart cells communicate from one cell to the next? What? Someone said it? Gap junctions, right? This is the intercalated disc, the gap junction, so it's electrical windows from one cell to the next, okay? All right, so in the heart, in the right atrium of the heart, we have this structure called the SA node, the sinoatrial node, okay? And that is in the right atrium, yes? Yes? Anyone know that? No? Okay. Anyway, so the SA node then gets stimulated, and once it's stimulated, sodium starts to leak into this cell. We should point out that sodium likes to live outside the cell. Potassium likes to live inside the cell. And what does calcium like? Calcium likes to be outside the cell also initially. Okay? All right, so as sodium starts to leak inside the cell, we have inside the cell, we have what's called a resting membrane potential. Okay? Resting membrane potential, and that equals minus 90 millivolts. Okay, that's what the cell is normally at, is minus 90 millivolts. All right, so now measuring this cell, okay, minus 90 millivolts gives the cell what we call polarity. Do you agree? So the distance away from zero is a polar. It causes it to be polar. It's either positive or negative away from zero, so we actually end up with a polarity there. So, or in other words, a charge, okay? So minus 90 millivolts is the resting membrane potential of a myocardial cell, okay? All right, so now as sodium starts to leak in, sodium is a what? What is sodium? Na plus.
Cation.
It's a cation, right? So as I start to bring a cation into the cell, what happens to that resting membrane potential? So as I start to bring a positive cation in, so what happens to the resting membrane potential? It starts to become more positive, right? So, or less negative. How's that? Was that okay? Less negative, more positive, whatever. So we start to bring sodium in. So next thing that happens, it becomes minus 85, minus 80, 75, until it gets to minus 70 millivolts. And this is called threshold potential. Threshold potential, okay? So minus 70 millivolts is threshold potential. Once we achieve threshold potential, these things we call voltage gated channels, or fast voltage gated channels, called what type of channels? There are voltage gated channels. They are sodium voltage gated channels. Okay? Once we hit this threshold potential, sodium pours in through a process of, what's that? What's the process called?
Diffusion.
What?
Diffusion.
Diffusion. All right, so they diffuse through. Now, if I'm pouring sodium into this cell, what's happening to the voltage here? As I'm pouring the voltage, as I'm pouring this in, what happens to the voltage here? What? It becomes more, remember, sodium is what? Positive, we're still down here negative. We've already leaked some sodium in and it brought it up. So what happens if I pour it in fastly, what happens? So we end up with a trace, an electrical charge inside here that comes up really quick, okay? And it comes up to plus 10 millivolts, and then as soon as it hits plus 10, these guys shut off, all right? So as soon as we hit plus 10 millivolts, these shut off. They're sodium fast gated channels, or fast voltage gated channels. Sodium fast voltage gated channels. And voltage gated, right, means that they're controlled by voltage. So when they get to a certain voltage, then they fire. Okay? All right. Now, I want to point out something that minus 90 millivolts, so remember, opposites attract in this stuff, right? Okay, so sodium, positive, minus 90 millivolts, so it actually kind of pulls, like a magnet would, a strong magnet would pull them in quicker. So if I had less voltage here, it wouldn't pull it in as fast. Okay, we'll talk about that in a minute. That's going to come into play here in a little while. Okay, all right. So next we showed calcium there, right? All right. So we have calcium and potassium we have to deal with now. So we shut the voltage gated channels off of sodium. Okay, we shut these channels off for the sodium, and then when this happens, we end up with calcium channels. We have calcium channels. Okay, and we have the potassium channels. Okay, so calcium channels at this point at plus 10 turn on, just like the sodium channels opened up down here. These open up here, as well as potassium channels. Okay, and we end up what's called a plateau phase. So we have potassium leaving. Potassium's leaving. Calcium is doing what? Calcium is coming in, correct? Okay? All right, and calcium's coming in. So the net movement is potassium leaving, calcium coming in. So the net movement or voltage change inside the cell is kind of at a plateau, yes? All right, and then the calcium channel shut off, and we end up with only what happening? Potassium is leaving quickly. And we end up coming back down to minus 90 millivolts. So if I'm losing potassium, the inside the cell is becoming more what? Potassium's what? K, potassium is K, right? K what plus?
Positive.
So if I'm losing a positive source inside the cell becomes more negative, right? More electronegative, okay? So this right here is what we consider one cardiac cycle, which is what? Okay, which is a heartbeat, but let's be more specific. Let's not call it a heartbeat anymore. Let's call it one systole and one diastole. So one contraction relaxation, right? Okay. All right, so this is considered one contraction relaxation. All right, so now, I said before that minus 90 millivolts is polar, right? You guys remember that? Minus 90 millivolts is polar. So if I'm bringing this up towards 0, what am I doing to inside the cell if this is polar?
Making
We are depolarizing. Okay? So if we are reducing the amount of polarity in the cell by changing the voltage, we are depolarizing it. Okay? Now what happens when I'm bringing it back? We are repolarizing. Okay? So you can see that we go through a depolarization and a repolarization every time we go through a cardiac cycle. Okay? Every time we go through a cardiac cycle. Right now, what is the problem at the end of a depolarization, repolarization cycle? Anyone see that off the top of their head? What's the problem? What have we done to the ions? Where's potassium? Where's sodium? Where's calcium? Okay, so what do you guys know that can cause the reversal of sodium-potassium ions? Anatomy 1. Sodium-potassium exchange pumps, right? Okay, sodium-potassium exchange pumps, as well as we also have calcium pumps. I don't know if you remember that from muscle contraction, pumping calcium back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum, okay? So we have to reverse this, and that happens between every cardiac cycle. So it's waves, right? Okay, just that fast. All right, so we brought sodium in the initial phase. What does it do? Sodium comes in, opens, changes the polarity of this cell, brings it up to plus 10 millivolts, changes resting membrane potential, hits threshold potential, opens the voltage gated channels, and then shuts it off, opens calcium and potassium, and we get repolarization. Sodium also comes in and does what? When it's initially coming in, goes to the next cell, okay, through the gap junctions. This is communication. This is sodium communication from one cell to the next. This is how we get an autorhythmicity, or a syncytium, okay? A syncytium, which is the beat from one cell to the next, okay? This is how we get one cell beating. This is why we can disconnect a heart through plumbing, cut the plumbing away, pull a heart out, stick it in someone else, plumb it up, and shock it, and it starts beating again, right? This is why, because each cell talks to each other cell through these things called gap junctions, okay? Okay? Everyone all right with that? All right, so let's review that again real quick. All right, so we have initial phase, we have a myocardial cell, right? Myocardial cell, sodium, after stimulation of the SA node, sodium starts to leak in, which changes what? Changes the resting membrane potential, and it starts it to bring it, become more what? Become more what? More positive, right? Starts to become more positive until it hits threshold potential, which is minus 70 millivolts, right? Minus 70 millivolts. Once it achieves minus 70 millivolts, sodium fast gated channels open, sodium diffuses in quickly, changes the internal environment of the cell from minus 70 millivolts to plus 10 millivolts quickly, okay? Once we hit that plus 10 millivolts, those sodium channels close, potassium and calcium channels open for a period of time. Remember, this is amplitude over time, okay? So over time, this chart is time, right? This is a cell, but this is still time. So over time, then Calcium continues to remain open, calcium's coming in, potassium's leaving, gives us this plateau phase, a net no change difference, all right? Calcium channels shut, potassium continues to expel through the cell or leave the cell, which causes the voltage to come back down to the resting membrane potential. At the same time, sodium leaves through gap junctions into the neighboring cells, and we get this wave of, what is this called? A wave of depolarization. Okay? All right, so this wave of depolarization happening. So when we look at this, we can say depolarization is actually systole in the heart. Contraction, right? Repolarization is when it's relaxed and it starts to change the numbers back to where they're supposed to be. Okay. So let's talk about, I'm gonna pull a piece of, I went from a cell, and I'm gonna talk about a piece of tissue. Okay, from, what's the heart cells called? Myocardial. Okay, so we're talking about a myocardial piece of tissue, okay? All right, so if I have, actually we gotta kind of talk about, first of all, anyone know what a vector is? Anyone know what a vector is? Anyone? Okay, let's talk about it real quick. So a vector is a description of direction and amplitude. Okay, so a vector is a description of direction and amplitude. So they can be in any direction and the amount of force applied. So for example, if I had a car, this is a car, and he was heading that way, that's the arrow, and he was going 10 miles an hour, all right? And I had another car, and he was going 7 miles an hour. I can actually add these together to get the amplitude of this. Okay, this is just an example, so this is a vector, okay? Direction and amplitude. It doesn't have to be miles an hour. It can be electrical force too. It can be wind speed. It can be whatever it is you want. Any force in any direction can be given a vector. It just depends on what you want to call that particular stuff. So in the heart, we have to know the vectors of the electrical current to describe, so it'll come, we'll see why later, okay? So we have this thing called vectors, okay? We have this thing called vectors, right? So we have this piece of myocardial tissue, okay? Myocardial tissue. Right? And in the myocardial tissue are these cells. Okay? Now, as we go through the initial stages of cellular stimulation or myocardial stimulation, is called what? What do we call it? Starts with a D, sounds like depolarization, okay? All right, so the initial, when we stimulate the cells first time, they're gonna go through this depolarization first, which is what? Represented by positive. So depolarization, remember, this is polar down here, and if I bring it up towards 0, it becomes depolarized, okay? What? Okay. All right, so as we stimulate this piece of myocardial tissue, we start getting all these cells start to turn positive. It means they're no longer at that resting membrane potential. Yes? Agree?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So as we do this, and then through the gap junctions, which are what? Windows of communication from one cell to the next. So we end up with a bunch of different vectors from each of the cells moving in this direction. Let's just say from point A to point B. You agree with that we have a wave of depolarization occurring, right? Through those gap junctions, okay? All right. So it's moving from A to B, okay? All right, now, I just told you that vectors can be added together, right? So what we do, we end up with, because of this process, we end up with a vector that is to the right, to the right, yes, going that way, and depolarization. So now this is adding all of the arrows, all of the vectors together to get this vector right here of depolarization, okay? So I get to represent all of that cellular depolarization as one arrow in a primary direction, okay? So even if I had tissue and the depolarization was going this way, or even this way, even if it went back this way, I still get to add it to this, okay? So it doesn't matter which way the arrows are going, but you have to look at the primary direction of the tissue and which way the wave's going to figure out the vector, which way it's going. Does that make sense? That'll come clear in just a minute, okay? Now, something else we need to say, if I had, let's say this is the atrial wall, okay, or this is the lateral portions of the ventricles, okay? I had a major myocardial portion of the heart, another piece of tissue, only this one is much thicker, okay? And we had the same kind of setup. Remember, this is just a thicker piece of tissue, right? Which is just more cells, right? You agree? Okay. I end up with the same size. I end up with a bigger arrow. It's a stronger vector. Okay? Does that make sense? More tissue, more cells, more vectors, more strength of the vector. Okay, so now through myocardial cells, the speed of communication through what? Through the what? Through the gap junctions is considered moderate speed. Okay, so this is considered moderate speed. Moderate speed through that, okay? All right. Okay, obviously a heart, yes? Okay. All right, so first of all, this is kind of representative of how the heart sits in the human body. Okay, you agree? Apex kind of pointed down to the left there, yeah, okay? All right, why is this different shape than this one to this one?
It
to
pumps
the circulatory system.
Right?
It pumps harder. It needs more muscle to
For
pump
what?
throughout the body.
There you go, okay. So this is what side of the heart?
Right side.
Right, there you go, right side, okay? So this is right atrium, right ventricle, which pumps to where? So the pulmonic circuit, okay? This side is the systemic for our heart, and it pumps to the rest of the body, okay? We need much more muscle tissue through the ventricular side of the left side than we do the right side. We gotta pump through all the rest of the body, not just the lungs, okay? All right, so. The initial thing, remember we said before, where's the SA node? Okay, so we have the SA node, which is also called the what? SA is the sinoatrial node, okay? Sinoatrial node. Okay? It is the pacemaker of the heart. Right? It sets up the rhythm of the heart. Normal rhythm being 70-ish, 72-ish, right? Okay, so sinoatrial node. All right, so once we stimulate the sinoatrial node, what happens to the myocardial cells? Look over there. Sodium starts to leak in, right? Raising resting membrane potential to threshold potential. Then we depolarize. Okay? So we depolarize. So we have this group of cells around the SA node. Okay? Of course, now I can do cells all the way through the atrium, right? But we need to show what? What does the arrows represent? A vector of what? A direction of what? What are we representing by the vector?
The sodium thing.
What's this called?
Depolarization.
We're representing depolarization. So this is representing, these vectors represent depolarization of the, where's it located? Where's it? Myocardium, okay. Where's it located?
The right.
Well, both sides. We're gonna do the whole thing, okay? So remember, atriums contract together and ventricles contract together, okay? So atriums, this is representing atrial depolarization. Okay, atrial depolarization. Now you guys remember a little bit of anatomy that we actually did of the heart. We have these things here that are called what? I got it. That are called what? Okay, so we have valves, right? Tricuspid, bicuspid, semilunars, right? So valves. So this right here represents what? What did you say? The cardiac skeleton, which is a band of what? Okay, more specific. Myocardium is tissue too, okay? So a band of fibrous tissue that makes the heart very strong. We put the valves in it to make it give it, because that's where the strength is. It's also what? So we have, remember, we have this depolarization that's occurring here, right? So it's also an isolator, all right? So the signal, this cardiac signal cannot pass this fibrous tissue. It does not transmit signal, all right? Why do we want to do that? Why do we want to stop the signal at the cardiac skeleton?
Because you have two different things that happen.
What are the two different things?
The deoxygenated blood and then the oxygenated blood is walking through. I don't know.
Okay, so we have the band of fibrous tissue there, the band to stop the signal, because we need to give the atriums time to finish. We need to give them time to finish depolarizing before we start this down here. All right, before we start that. So that being said, then we have this, this little thing right here in the center, which is the only place that the signal can penetrate through that cardiac skeleton, or the fibers. They call it annulus fibers. These are annulus with circular, right? All the way around, like a year, annulus. These annulus fibers, this is the only place that the signal can pass through. Okay, we'll get to that in just a second. So, with this vectors occurring through all of this atrial tissue, we end up with a vector in which direction? In which direction? Down into the what? Down into the what?
To the left.
Down and to the left. Of what? What's down and to the left? opposites, what's positive?
Polarization.
Depolarization, down and to the left. Okay, so the positive and negatives are gonna become important, and you'll see why, okay? All right, so depolarization, down and to the left. Everyone agree with that, adding the vectors together? Yes? Okay. All right, so now, as this finishes, as it's finishing, it's already the signal's already started going through this thing here that we call this is called the atrioventricular node. The atrioventricular node. Okay? Now, the atrioventricular node is the gateway for the signal to come down into the what? Into the ventricles, okay? The signal has to go through there. All right, so the atrioventricular node, rather, is a group of specialized cells, okay? A group of specialized cells. Remember, we said that we had the spider's tissue, and we have this guy here. This primary job of the atrioventricular node as a gatekeeper is a time delay. Why does it need to be a time delay? There's a good word. Depolarization of what? To finish depolarization of what? The atrium. Remember, we have to finish this before we start coming down. So it's a time delay. How is it that it is a time delay? That's the question. What causes the signal to slow down through the AV node? Well, first of all, the cells inside the AV node are much smaller. Much smaller. And they're not lined up right next to each other. Okay? All right, so the cells are smaller. They're kind of offset 90 degrees. They have reduced number of what's that communication from one cell to that gap junctions. And the most important thing is resting membrane potential of the AV node is minus 60 millivolts. Okay? Resting membrane potential of the SA node is minus 60 millivolts. Okay. Now, that's important. Why? Why is minus 60 millivolts the most important? Remember what I said? This one here is minus 90 millivolts. All right, it's actually faster than minus 60, even though you say, well, it's closer to zero, why would it be faster, right? Remember, we're talking about polarity, and opposites attract. And if I had a big magnet vice a little magnet, and I was trying to pick up something off the ground, off the table here, if I had a really strong magnet, it would pull it up much closer. If I was the same distance, it would be faster too, right? Everyone's used a magnet before, right? Had different magnets before, and then so the little one's not as strong, it's slower to pull it over. Those big ones are like bam, right over, right? Okay, that's the same thing. Minus 60 millivolts is less polar. It pulls not as hard, less hard. Okay. All right, so those are the reasons why the atrioventricular node is actually a time delay, which gives us a time to finish depolarization of the atrium. Okay, remember, depolarization is considered positive, bringing it back up. Okay. All right, let's talk about another group of specialized cells. Okay, this group of specialized cells is called the Purkinje system. Okay, the Purkinje system. Okay, so Purkinje system is a specialized group of cells that actually speed up conduction. Okay, they actually speed up conduction. The Purkinje system is considered very fast. Very fast, okay? Why would I need a very fast conduction system here in this, in the ventricles? Common sense. Supply the what? Okay, so now let's just talk about the heart. Why do I need the heart to have a very fast conduction system, wires, in the ventricles? What? What's it doing? What is the Purkinje system innervating, stimulating? What is it stimulating? What's this down here? The ventricles, right? Okay, so the ventricles, it's stimulating the ventricles. Now, does the ventricles contract, like this part of the ventricles, then this part, then this part, then this part, or do we try and get it all together? To do that, I have to do what? I have to get them all stimulated primarily at the same time. Would you agree? Right? So then we get a squeeze, release, not a, and then a release. It is still kind of like that, but not, it's not perfect, okay? So we got a little time delay between them. Okay? All right, so let me, okay, so it kind of looks like the ventricles, yes? Okay, without the stuff on top. You agree? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Best I can do on top of all the coffee this morning. Right? What's this? Which is a what? Which is a time delay. So I was going to show you this one. So when the signal comes through the AV node, reduced number of gap junctions, minus 60 millivolts, smaller, they're offset. We end up with the signal having to do this. To get through. It's not exactly a perfect signal, right? So it's not straight. So when it's going through the Purkinje system, right, it is what? These cells are, what we say, wider. They're longer. Increased number of gap junctions. Minus 90 millivolts. Okay? We say it's also very fast. Okay, so Purkinje system is the cells are wider. You can see that would be faster to get through, right? Do I need to explain that? Everyone can see that the signal going from here just through 3 cells to get through instead of 25 cells that only has to go through 3 cells would be much faster, right? Increased gap junction, so it has more choices to go through, right? Makes sense? And that millivolts, minus 90 millivolts is important. All right, so this is what? In the center of the ventricles is considered what? It's called the what? This thing right here, this whole thing right here is called the what? Because anatomy of the heart is what? What is the center thing in between the ventricles? What? What? You gotta say it up, I can't hear you.
I just said it means muscle.
Okay, but what's it, it's called the interventricular septum. Sulcus is a groove. Okay, sulcus is on the outside of the heart. Okay, so this is the interventricular septum. This is what separates right and left ventricles of the heart. Yes? The uppermost portion, right after the AV node, is fibrous. But we also have this thing called the bundle of his, H-I-S, right? You guys heard that? So the uppermost portion of the interventricular septum, I got wobbly there. The uppermost portion is fibrous tissue, which we already said doesn't conduct electricity, right? Right? So this up here is fibrous tissue, primarily. Okay, so this is bundle of his. You just know why it's called his? I was gonna be sarcastic. No, it's called bundle of his, because the guy that discovered it is called, his name is his. Who has the last name of his? Bundle of his. Okay. Anyway. All right, so this fibrous tissue does not conduct electricity in the uppermost portion of the interventricular septum. Okay, this is called the interventricular septum, yes? Okay, of course, this is our AV node. This is the, what is this one called then, this blue one here? What side is it on? What side is this? What side is this? Left, this is called the left
Ventricle. No.
bundle branch. This then would be the, what?
Left bundle branch?
This one?
Right.
No, is that branch?
Bundle right. Branch. Branch. Okay, so left and right bundle branches. Okay, left and right bundle branches. All right, so now, this fibrous tissue, listen, this isn't gonna be important here, listen. Okay, this fibrous tissue continues on down and encapsulates the left and right bundle branches so that the stimulation, it can't stimulate this tissue until it gets down here towards the end where there's a few windows. So the encapsulation is like a wire in your house, right? On the outside of the wire is a sleeve that insulates the wire from other stuff so it doesn't short, right? Right, that's the same thing. It's just a sleeve of fibrous tissue that insulates it until it gets down here where then Purkinje fibers will then stimulate the interventricular septum. Okay, interventricular septum. So then the wave of what? The wave of what? These are arrows representing depolarization is which way? So we end up with a vector that is okay, agreed? Yes? Up and to the right. Up and to the right. That's where that vector is going. Now this is called, this is the base of the ventricles up here. This is called basoventricular depolarization. Okay, this is called basoventricular depolarization. It's our BVDs. Basoventricular depolarization. Okay, and of course that is that. This is the second, or third rather, electrical event. Okay, the third electrical event in the heart. All right, so now we have, remember this is left and right bundle branches, and then we have these things called Purkinje fibers that come out. Now, in the myocardium, which is what? What is myocardium?
Heart cell.
Heart cells. There are different layers. What's the inside tissue, the most innermost layer of the inside of the heart called? The actual tissue that's on the surface of the inside of the heart. That's on the outside of the heart. What's on the inside of blood vessels is called endothelium. This is called endocardium. And it's a surface layer of tissue inside the heart. So this layer of tissue in the heart muscle is called, now wait for it, subendocardial myocardium. Just make it harder and harder, don't we? Just keep adding to it, right? So this one is called what? By the way, this is the most superficial or deepest layer?
The endocardium.
It's the deepest layer. Remember, out here is surface. Going in is the deepest layer. So if I say the Purkinje fibers are only located in the deepest tissue of the heart, which is called what?
The
Subendocardial myocardium. Right? Is that like, are you guys there yet? Not yet? We're getting there, right? We'll be there in a few minutes. Subendocardial myocardium. Subendocardial myocardium.
Is that one word?
Yeah, it is. What? What? Subendocardial myocardium. I need to write it?
Yeah.
That's all I'll say. Subendocardial myocardium. Subendocardial myocardium. Okay, subendocardial myocardium. All right, so then this is just myocardium. Oh my God, they need to make a better word than that. Then this one is what? What's on the outside of the heart?
Epicardium.
So this is then subpericardial myocardium. Okay, myocardium.
The easy one.
Right, myocardium, it's just in the middle. Okay, so then this one is sub what? Run out of ink on my pen, just write all those out. Okay. Time to get up. All right, okay, subpericardial myocardium. All right. So, Purkinje system is considered a what?
Very fast.
Very fast. Very fast, right? Okay, it's very fast. All right, the Purkinje system is only located in the subendocardial myocardium. Right, so now, as we come around, we've stimulated the basoventricular depolarization of the interventricular septum. Say that 10 times fast. Right? Okay, so we stimulated the interventricular septum. We get a depolarization wave up and to the right. Now we come through here, we have this large portion of heart. Remember what I said about larger portions of heart, we get a bigger what?
Vector.
Vector, okay? So now as we come through, we stimulate the subendocardial myocardium, then we start generating these what? The arrows are considered
Vector.
vectors, right? Okay, so after going through this, and we're creating a wave or a syncytium, right? Autorhythmicity of vectors of depolarization. The primary, because this has so much muscle tissue, this ventricular side, left side, is about 3 times as much muscle as the right side. So we end up with this wave of depolarization. Which way? Which way is that?
Down to the left.
Down and to the left. I'll be there. Okay, down and to the left. Okay? As the wave of depolarization continues from stimulation of the Purkinje fibers in the subendocardium myocardium. We end up with vectors that are depolarization, which is what? Depolarization, which is what? Positive. Which way? Up and to the right. Okay, up and to the right. All right, so we can look at this as first wave is which way? Interventricular septum stimulated from which side? Doesn't that sound like a test question? The interventricular septum is stimulated by the left bundle branch. Only the left bundle branch, right? Okay. So this interventricular septum is only stimulated by the left bundle branch. Okay. All right. So we end up with a wave of depolarization from the interventricular septum. Which way? Up and to the right. Then we have major myocardial depolarization. Remember, this is basoventricular depolarization. This is major myocardial depolarization. Major myocardial depolarization, okay? And then this is what we call basolateral depolarization. Basolateral depolarization. Okay? So major myocardial depolarization. Remember, I'm drawing these arrows kind of representative of amount of tissue that they stimulate, right? Okay. All right, let's, got it? Everyone okay with the vectors? Right, this is the force, the current, direction, and amplitude, okay? All right, so now we have who's taking pictures of the back of my head? Okay, all right, so we have volts. Not volts. Volts. Okay, volts. All right, so we have 0 volts right here. All right, now everybody knows what an EKG looks like, right? The picture of the heart signal on an EKG. Everyone's seen the sinus rhythm, normal sinus rhythm. All right. Now, the reason we teach you this normal sinus rhythm because you have to know the normal sinus rhythm so then you can look at something and say, that's not right. Why is that not sharp? Why is it longer? Why does it take more time? Then you can start saying, well, what's the problem? And then you can equate it directly to a portion in the heart. Okay, so we'll talk about that in a second. All right, so what's the very first electrical event in the heart that we talked about today? Depolarization of myocardial tissue in the, not right, the atrium. So remember, they're primarily, by the way, there's some fibers up here, like Purkinje system, but we don't really talk about them. They just kind of run the signal over, so it's a little quicker. But anyway, so we get atrial depolarization. Now, atrial depolarization is always what? Positive, right? And it's which way? Down and to the left. Follow the arrow. The arrow. Atrial depolarization. Remember the vector? This is an electrical event. Primary, adding all those arrows together. Okay? All right, so let's do this. I'm going to do a self-portrait here. Okay? heart. That's me, we got a big heart. Hence why your test grades. Okay, so this is where we put the leads in an EKG system, okay? We put negative on the right side, positive down on the left, which then measures this electrical events in the heart. So negative up here, positive down here. So you can see it, right? Now you guys will obviously do more than 2 leads generally, okay? 2 leads is a white and green. White is right, okay? So anyway, negative and positive, not really important for us, I'm not gonna test it, okay? All right, so we have negative up on that side, positive on this side on the EKG machine, all right? Now, the first electrical event we talked about is atrial depolarization, down and to the left, right? Down and to the left. So we have down and to the left is positive in which direction? So positive, you guys remember algebra? A positive times a positive, a negative times a negative, a negative times a positive, negative, right? Okay, so a positive in the positive direction gives a positive. What's the speed of the myocardial cells? Moderate speed. Okay? What's the next electrical event that happens in the heart? What's the next electrical event? Okay, now this is such a small piece of tissue that it actually is not read by the galvanometer, the EKG machine, okay? It can't hear it, it's so small. But it's a time delay, right? So it has to go finish that, has to go through that, so we end up with this thing that's called isoelectric. All right, isoelectric. What? No, well, you have to come up and take a picture. Right. So it's ISO, electric. Isoelectric, okay? All right, so what's the next event that happens? So this is, we said this is the AV node, right? Time delay, okay? For all those reasons. The next event is what? Basoventricular depolarization. Remember, this is the base of the ventricles. This is basoventricular depolarization, a positive vector. Which way? Up and to the right. Remember, it's stimulated by the left bundle branch through the windows, through the electrical windows, which then stimulates up and to the right. The wave of depolarization goes up and to the right. We add those vectors. A positive in which direction? A positive and a negative direction is a negative. Positive times negative is a negative, right? Remember, positive times a negative is a negative. Okay? Now, we said the Purkinje system is what?
Very fast.
Very fast. So we end up with what? Okay? All right? All right. Next, what's stimulated next? Major myocardial depolarization. A very large vector, right? Very large, you'd agree? A positive in the positive direction through the Purkinje system, which is very fast. So we end up with a very large positive. Okay? Next we have basolateral depolarization, which is positive in the up and right. to the negative direction, we end up with
Negative.
very fast, right? Okay? Next we have isoelectricity. This represents what? What's happened?
It's going through the
Why is it isoelectric?
It's going through the H ribbon.
What's going on here? This is depolarization, right? So the entire ventricular system is now positive, which means depolarized. So the entire ventricular system is now depolarized. Depolarized. All right. Now let's talk about, real quickly, let's do purple. We're totally depolarized, yes? Repolarization is what? Negative, right? Okay, so, I'm gonna kind of jump to the end here. So we have, what's this tissue out here?
The
Subpericardial myocardium. Subpericardial myocardium. Okay, so depolarization, or I'm sorry, repolarization occurs from the outside in. Major myocardium, repolarization is what? Negative. Okay, negative. Repolarization is negative. Why does it occur from the outside in? Let's think about it common sense factor wise. As the heart contracts, what happens to the blood flow in the heart? We're not talking about systemic blood flow to the pulmonary or systemic circuit. I'm talking about the blood that feeds the heart. What happens? So when it's contracting, what's happened to that blood? Nothing. It's not moving. Okay? It can't. The heart is squeezing. It forces the blood out. It's just like your muscles in your legs push the blood up to your body because they're squeezing. So we can't feed the heart muscle we cannot perfuse the heart with blood when it's contracting or going through, starts with an S, systole, okay? When the heart rests, it goes through diastole. When it rests, the blood flows through those arteries and veins of the heart and stimulate perfusion through the heart. Does that make sense? So, and that being said, what has to occur is repolarization, which only occurs in diastole. And where does the blood start flowing first? If you're not flowing in the heart, blood on the outside of the heart starts flowing first and then flows into the heart. So repolarization occurs first from the outside in. Does that make sense? Okay, so repolarization, we've already said, is negative, a negative event in the negative direction, and then this system is what? Down here is what? What speed? What speed?
Very fast.
Why is it fast?
It's the
Where's the Purkinje fibers? Subendocardial myocardium. So is there a Purkinje system out here?
No.
So Rodney's correct. It's moderate speed. It's regular myocardial cells. So moderate speed, a negative in the negative direction is moderate speed. Okay? Now this one is called what? They call this wave what? It's called a P wave, right? I know you're close, right? This one is what? Q, R, S. Okay, and then this one is what? Okay? All right. So, listen, I'm gonna go through this again real quick, okay? All right? So listen, you You guys should have it written down already, just listen, okay? All right, so the first thing that happens is we have a myocardial cell. SA stimulation, SA node stimulation is stimulated by calcium ions, the SA node. Then sodium starts to leak in the myocardial cells, which causes a change in the resting membrane potential, which is minus 90 millivolts. It starts to bring it up towards minus 70 millivolts, which is called the threshold potential. Once the threshold potential is achieved, the sodium channels open up, and these are fast-gated voltage channels, which open up and cause sodium to pour in through a process of diffusion. Minus 90 millivolts, because it's such a large polarity, pulls those in very quickly. We get this electrical charge trace that's very fast, up to positive 10 millivolts. Once we achieve positive 10 millivolts, sodium channels shut, calcium and potassium ions open. Remember, potassium and sodium and calcium, where they live. Potassium's on the inside, sodium and calcium are on the outside, okay? Calcium starts to pour in through diffusion, potassium starts to leave. Gives us the isoelectric or plateau phase of this trace, okay? The plateau phase, okay? After a time, the calcium channels shut, potassium channels remain open, and we end up with the decreasing charge or decreasing positivity inside the, what are we doing? All right, decreasing positivity inside the myocardial cell. Does that make sense? So far, so good, right? At the same time as sodium came in, sodium passed through the gap junctions, intercalated discs of the heart. This is where we have, this is the communication from one cell to the next. This creates the syncytium or the autorhythmicity of the heart. Okay, now that is, when it becomes positive, it is less polar, less distance from the zero, so it is called depolarized. So up here is depolarized. Down here is, when we come back down, it's called repolarized. Both are represented, one's represented as positive, one is negative. So depolarization is positive, repolarization is negative. Of course, then we have our algebraic forms of the vectors, which you can see over there. All right, so this is one myocardial cell in a cardiac cycle, which is systolic and diastolic, right? Everyone agree? Okay, next, we have to talk about what happens in the tissue. As this continues through the wave, the cells next to each other or adjacent to each other become depolarized as this continues through. We add up all the vectors created that. Remember, vectors show force and direction. Adding all these arrows up together causes a vector, in this case, from A to B, and it's depolarization, which is positive. Right? If I increase the thickness of this vector gets larger, more force, more cells going through depolarization, okay? Which means more current. All right, so next we have this thing in the heart. We have this thing called the sinoatrial node. It is the pacemaker of the heart, roughly 70, 72 beats a minute, roughly, okay? The SA node stimulates these myocardial cells to go through depolarization, and it goes through a wave. It sends out the signal, like if you were to drop a rock in a pond, it sends it out in all directions, okay? In this case, it can't send it out outside the heart, so it sends it in the heart, and it's down into the left, right? Okay? So a wave of depolarization, add up all the arrows, and we end up with a positive down and to the left. This fibrous band right here is fibrous tissue. It does not conduct electricity. The only way for the signal to pass from the atriums into the ventricle is through the AV node. So this AV node is actually a time delay to allow these two ventricles to completely go through depolarization. Once that's finished, it should start sending on. The AV node is a time delay because it has smaller cells, they're offset, reduced number of gap junctions, and the inside resting membrane potential is minus 60 millivolts, all right? It's less polar, it doesn't pull as hard to get those things to come through each of the cells, like this, right? So it's minus 60 millivolts instead of minus 90, okay? All right, so time delay, by the time this is ready to come into the bundle of his, the atriums have finished depolarizing, okay? All right, so now as it comes into the bundle of his, into the ventricular septum, interventricular septum, between the ventricle septum, interventricular septum, which is a fibrous tissue up here on the top of the ventricle, okay? The ventricle septum, rather. The bundle his comes through, it splits into the right and left bundle branches, which come down the outer sides of that. The sleeve of the ventricle, or the sleeve of this fibrous tissue, encapsulates the left and right bundle branches so that they don't stimulate the tissue yet. From the left bundle branch, there are electrical windows that allow the signal to enter back into the interventricular septum, which then stimulate up and to the right. Okay? That up and to the right of depolarization. Remember that the Purkinje system is very fast. And what makes it very fast? The cells are wider, they're longer, increased number of gap junctions between them, which is communication, right? And it's a very much larger polarity, minus 90 millivolts, okay? All right, so that's very fast through there. So we have a very fast signal. The very fast signal is so that we can stimulate the ventricles primarily at the same time. See how this is 0.1 second, okay? So that's very fast, it's pretty close, right? Okay. All right, so as it comes down, comes around, the Purkinje system is actually only located in the innermost layer, which is called the subendocardial myocardium. Okay? From there, the wave comes out, stimulates the rest of this tissue here at the apex of the heart, which is the major myocardial depolarization, which gives us a vector of down and to the left. Depolarization positive, right? Continues around the sides, or the lateral portion of the heart, which is then called the basolateral depolarization, which is positive in the upper to the right direction. Okay? All right, now, as we go through repolarization, the heart contracts systole. When it relaxes, going through diastole, blood starts to flow on the outside of the heart, which allows the signal of repolarization, which is negative, remember it's going back negative, to occur or start from the subpericardial myocardium, okay? And that goes back then up to the right as a negative contraction. So the P wave represents what? Atrial depolarization. Q represents basoventricular depolarization. R represents major myocardial depolarization. S represents basolateral depolarization, and T represents major ventricular repolarization. Okay, so we'll stop there because we're out of time. So if you need to take a picture,